We're about ready to start in about a minute here. I'm in Spencerville, Indiana, which is right outside of Fort Wayne. I'm Al Brothers, the Society Vice President. And right now it's 85 degrees out and partly cloudy. So it's an interesting day. So right now I'd like to get started. And to do that, let me bring up my screen. I want to say welcome to everybody. And again, our topic for today is researching records, vital records specifically. And again, many times people have asked the question of how did vital records start? So let me first show you what the agenda is. We're going to talk about the history of vital records, what questions we are seeking answers to using vital records. What are vital records? When did vital records start, particularly at the state level? And the question is, why state level records? Then how to find state level vital records and indexes online, and then we'll conclude with a summary. I guess one of the key things that we all are interested in is when and where were they born? Who are their parents? When and where do they indicate a desire to get married? Intentions, bands, bonds, what are those terms? When and where did they get married? Who are the parents listed? And who are the witnesses and other officials, depending upon the form? When and where did they die? Who reported the death? Then the last item is, how do I find the records and indexes? Now, vital records are most commonly referred to as, again, birth, marriage, and death records, marriage licenses and divorce decrees, wills, and the like. And they typically are created by local authorities. And with the possible exception for overseas births, deaths, and marriages in the military or in the District of Columbia, they are not considered federal records, but they are legal documents. Now, here's a listing of what are the vital records. We mentioned birth records and indexes, marriage records and indexes, death records and indexes, divorce decrees and wills, for example, are in fact considered vital records. Now, as we look at the birth record information, again, these are typically found on most birth record information sheets. The child's first name, birthday, birth location, parents' names, sex and race, and sometimes the parents' place of birth as well. So again, it just depends upon the record itself. Now, marriage records, really they concern things like common law marriage, and common law marriages are not recognized in all states, I might add. Bands and intentions, we talk about marriage bonds, applications and licenses. We're talking about records of marriages, certificates, returns and registers. And again, the returns and registers were when the officiating person at the marriage itself provided the information to either the city, town, or state. Now, slave marriages, again, were finally recorded after 1865 in the Freeman records. And again, we've had a discussion about that. But there were certain marriage restrictions, and it varied by state. The age you can get married at, whether, again, certain races could marry, and gender. Again, in most states, again, the requirement in years past was only male and females could get married. Now, what kind of information was concerned or available on a marriage record? Bride's names, bride's parents, her age, her race, the name of the groom's parents, his age, his race, and indications whether the bride or groom were married prior or widowed. So again, it's really quite a bit of information. Now, here's a marriage intention. Again, these are all handwritten, 1866, for my great uncle, Charles S. Monroe. And again, it talks about Oxford, Mass. His age was 22. He was a shoemaker. He was colored. And this was his first marriage. He was born in Littleton, Mass. and is the son of Stephen and Mary J. Monroe. And his mother's married name was Hazard. And his wife, Sophia A. Perry. Again, she was married before, so her maiden name was Reed of Oxford, age 28. Again, mulatto. This will be her second marriage. And she was born in Worcester, Mass. And she's the daughter of William Reed. And this was recorded on the 4th day of May, 1866. And this is a formal record. It was signed by the town clerk. Now, I'll show you a couple of things here. When you take a look at marriage records, particularly in years past, the records were obviously in books, and they, again, were hopefully neatly written. But again, it provides you a whole wealth of information. And again, this is from Worcester, Mass. And it gives you some insights in terms of the information. Let me show you what, let me back up here, I'm sorry. And again, it talks about the date, the names of the bride and groom. And again, their ages, their occupations, where they were born, their parents, where they were born, the officiating individual, and the actual date of the wedding itself. Now, I want to, because half my family comes from Nova Scotia. Now, how does it differ from a record in Nova Scotia? And again, this is Annapolis, Nova Scotia, 1881. And again, it says it was married solemnized in the county of Annapolis. And again, 1881. Let me give you a little bigger view of this. Okay. And again, you have the same thing here in terms of when and where they were married, their names, age, where they live, parents' names, and witnesses. So again, it gives you a complete comparison of records from the United States and from Canada. Now, death records are an interesting record. And the question always comes up, who reports the information to the state? Well, funeral homes can, hospitals can, doctors can. So again, those are typical methods of providing information directly to the state or town, for that matter. The information provided is listed: the date of death, the decedent's name, sex, marital status, age. Interesting, because this is important as you do family genealogy, disease or cause of death, and the residence and place of death, occupation, place of birth. Here again, parents' names and birthplaces, and in some cases, the informant. Now, this is a death index. And like a marriage index, again, what it provides, if you look across the top here, it talks about the last name of month, William H. Pittsfield in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The year is 1930. It's volume 76, page 458. So again, this is the index. You then go to either the town, county, or wherever to access the record, and that's where the record itself lies. Now, this is a death registry for 1883. Again, on each page, they listed by number, the persons on the record itself, the date of death, the name of the deceased. The question is, again, color, sex, age, disease or cause of death, location, occupation, place of birth, and names and birthplaces of parents. Now, the first one obviously died at 3 years, 2 months. And again, it talks about inabilities. And then the second one talks about consumption for Eugene Royals. So again, it gives you some insights in terms of who these people are. And Eugene was a shoemaker, talks about where he was born. Now, this is a sample death registry from 1877. Again, years before, but again, a very, very similar situation in terms of the registries themselves were books, and you'd actually go to the clerk's office and pull the books down to find out about the record itself. Now, as we expand it, you can see the individual's name, their sex, age, condition, where born, occupation, date and place of death, cause of death, signature of the informant. Now, this helps an awful lot. And when registered, and signature of deputy registrar. So again, that as you look at older records, they may look a little different. Now, where did vital records exist originally? Well, they were local. They were city records, town records, township records, village records, county records. They were local. There are also church records, parish records, and church records themselves. A key question I always ask myself when I look at these records, because now the information does reside at the state level, why does the state collect the data? And again, it's a vital statistic system, and it provides surveillance, and currently it provides value because it has electronic birth and death registration systems that helps to speed, again, the processing and acquisition of data. And here's an interesting fact: birth and death records are generally required by jurisdictions to be filed within 5 days of the event. And again, it's important because the families need to obtain certified copies of birth and death certificates quickly. Again, the death certificate, again, because the funeral home will not conduct a funeral until they have a death certificate itself. One of the key things that electronic death registration systems can provide is information about disease. For example, like our influenza pandemic, or potentially terrorist attack. So again, many of these things were done because of health considerations. It's interesting to look at when did states mandate record keeping on a state level. And I'll show you a chart here. And when you take note of the years the state vital record keeping began in each state, some counties or towns kept stats earlier, and some were slow to comply with state laws. So you need to check with your ancestors' local government for record availability. In my case in Massachusetts, and for my relatives in Massachusetts, again, they were town annual reports. And in the town annual report was a listing of marriage, births, and deaths for that preceding year. So again, it helps dramatically as you try to understand when that record keeping began. You'll have a copy of the, hopefully, we're sent a copy of this. This is by state. Again, the records, birth records, marriage records, death records. And again, it shows you, again, when they began. One of the early states indicated was Massachusetts, 1841, across the board. Again, as you take a look at some states, it's very, very different. Iowa was 1880, an early proponent. Ohio, 1908, 1949, and then 1908. You'll see an asterisk here. So each state is different. So as you start researching your ancestors and you want to do some statewide searching at the state level, the records may not be at the state level. Now, there was an asterisk for the vital records listed there. And Delaware statewide birth and death records stopped in 1863 and resumed in 1881. A note here that all Louisiana birth records are kept in parish clerk offices. And Tennessee has no statewide birth or death records for 1913. And again, I have to get in and actually find out why. Now, Washington, D.C.'s birth records go back to 1874, death records to 1855. But notice, none were filed in the Civil War, and marriage records to 1811. So it gives you some insights in terms of, as you look in different states, what information might be available on your relative. I want to share with you some of the example paper records that I have. Again, this is my father's, I use the term birth record. And again, it has his name, date of birth, the record number itself, again, his race, place of birth, his father and mother, and again, mother's maiden name, the residence at time of birth, and it was in Somerville. His father's occupation was a cook. His birthplace of his father was Annapolis, Nova Scotia. His mother, Pepperell, Mass. And the informant, again, was S.C. Andrews, a doctor. The date of record is November 17th, 1919. Now, this is a copy of another birth certificate, but again, It's dated December 15th, 1946. This is my sister's birth certificate. But I want to put out something unusual that took place in parts of Massachusetts. Yes, it does have that she's a female, but in many cases, African-American females, if they were fair complected, were designated as being white. It does list of our father and mother. It does indicate the place of birth, Boston Langham Hospital in Boston, and where they were living at the time, 143 Harrison Street. And my dad was a contractor. Then the date itself listed below is the date of the record. And the city registrar, Mary A. Manning, again, signed the record itself. Now, marriage is another one here. Let's go back here. Okay, we skipped over one. Now, this comes actually out of the marriage book in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is listed for the date of marriage, June 12, 1943. It's between my father-in-law and mother-in-law, Dover Wooten and Ella Day Hay Perry. And again, it talks about their ages, where they were residing at the time. Again, the number of the marriage. He was in the U.S. Army at the time. His birthplace is Martinfield, Virginia. It lists his father and mother. It lists Eleanor's occupation as a stenographer, and she was for many, many years. Her birthplace in Newton, name of her father and mother. And again, the intention of marriage by the couple was filed again on a particular date, and the certificate was issued. So again, this indicates, again, the certificate of marriage for Dover and Eleanor. Now, this is something you may or may not see on a regular basis. This is, yes, a certificate of marriage, but it's signed by a justice of the peace. This is for my mother and father. I think they eloped, what happened, if I remember correctly. But again, it shows you something, just something different that you'd actually have to go to either the city, town, or state to get that kind of information. Now, death certificates are interesting in the sense of what they can provide. Now, this is the death certificate of my grandfather, Dolan Yates. It gives his name, date of death. Again, it lists the race and color. He was married. He died 48 years, 10 months, 5 days. His wife was Irene Jones, that's her maiden name, and lived at 96 Harrison Street. It gives the cause of death and where he was buried, and the date of the record itself. In the left-hand side, it's interesting because when we talk about the city of Boston, I lived in Roxbury, and all of these communities were then annexed into the city of Boston in different years. So it gives you a little bit more information about the community itself. But the last one is a copy of a death record. And this is Frederick Monroe, again, his death date, where it took place, where he lived. He was unmarried, he was single. Age at death, 24 years. He was a porter. He was born in Groton, Mass. And he died from tuberculosis. Gives his father's name and his mother's name. So again, quite a bit of information relative to this particular individual. As you search vital records, a couple of keys. Know the name of the person you are seeking records for. And remember, when I say name, you may want to keep in mind their proper name, I use the term legal name, and they may have gone by an alias, meaning their first name, like mine is Al, for example, Alfred Al. They might have used Al for certain records versus Alfred. But on the documents here, you'll see that they were their full first names. And the key to finding information is knowing the birth date or year and location to help narrow the search, the death date or year as close as possible, and the same thing about a death location. Supporting information about parents and spouses help immensely in that search. And multiple records types can be found using this basic information. Now, based upon the information known, one of the key questions are, what records are available at a state level for that time period? It may be you have to check the local record availability. It may be the town or village. Now, where can I find statewide records or indexes online? Again, Ancestry.com has it. FamilySearch.com has it. I have a vital records handout that has information also. Let me show you an example. Now, this is an example of a statewide vital records information, and this is just there are 6 pages for this, but just indicates what's available. For Alabama, it talks about, again, birth, marriage, and death dates. And it asks a question about wait time for mail-in requests is not applicable. But the key here is restrictions. Births less than 125 years and deaths less than 25 years. Immediate family, including grandchild for death or legal representatives, are the ones who can apply for it. Now, ancestry marriage to 1969 and death to 1959 indexes, and family search and my heritages have different dates associated with it, as well as Find My Past. So again, these are some of the restrictions. Now, Arkansas, you take a look at Arkansas again, 1914 for birth, 1917 for marriage, 1914 for birth, 7 to 14 days. And again, it'll give you insights in terms of where to go online for those records. Birth less than 100 years, death 50 years, name, person or family members, and how to access it. So you have this information again in a handout for all 50 states, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the like as well. I'll show you later on. Let me stop this one here and I'll show you right now. Let me go back to share my screen here. Now, again, this is Ancestry.com. Now, this is the search window, if you will, for Ancestry.com. And you can notice on the left-hand side what's available. Again, Social Security death indexes. And again, this is on my family. Massachusetts marriage records. We're talking about, you can explore by collection. Marriage, birth, and death is a collection. Baptism, birth, and christening is another collection. Marriage and divorce is another one. And death, burial, cemetery, and obituaries is another set of collections. So depending on how you want to search. So let me do Charles. Okay. He was born 1844 and died in 1924. So again, let's see what shows up here. Again, on the search, it was filled out for me, has his brothers and sisters and everything else associated with it, with this thing here. In many cases, you might want to add that yourself. Now, the first thing you'll see here on the left-hand side is your again how the search was orchestrated. Right up top here, it talks about Ancestry Trees, and it does talk about, again, his spouse, his father, his mother, children. He has more children than that, but that's just an indication. Born in Littleton, death in Woodstock, and resided in 1917. So again, you have marriage records here. He was also in the Civil War, so we have Civil War information here. He's an interesting individual. He first went in the Navy and then came out and went into the cavalry. So just a very, very different individual in that sense. State census, 1855. His marriage, 1920 census. And death information. All of these are available, again, through Ancestry.com. So this is a tool that will allow you to get information on your relative if you have certain kinds of information. So that's Charles S. Monroe. Again, a very interesting man, a very dynamic individual. When we talk about, in a summary, that state level vital records are a more recent development. Again, when you take a look at them, most of them started around 1900 and continued up to around 1955. But the birth, death, and marriage information has been collected by different entities, primarily local, over the years. And sometimes this is the only record available for your relative in that time period because, again, state level records are not available. We talked about the companies such as Ancestry and Family Search are great tools in a search for the information. But one of the keys is knowing the time frame from the information you are seeking, and then checking to see if state level records are available for that time period and their restrictions. And you can initiate your search with as much information as you can. So are there any questions for me? This is just a light overview of state level records particularly, and how, again, you can find them. There are other tools you can find, for example, on death, obituaries, again, help an awful lot. Newspapers relative to marriages and births, again, were a key tool, over the years. It does give the infant's name and the parents. So again, all of this is critical in your search, but these tools are great tools. And I see from Sharon Stiles, have you ever requested a file from Social Security? Yes, my father's. Again, once he passed away, we wanted that information, and we did get it as far as that goes. So that does work. That system does work, because I had a Social Security number. So again, and his parents' information, so it was easy to go into and file. And if you go to the Social Security website, again, there's a form you can use electronically to file for it. And Guzzi mentioned, Gadzooks, try and remember if there's a cost. I hate to say it, I don't remember, to be honest about it. I don't remember. It's been a while ago, so you're testing my memory banks. Remember, if you file for records online, like I've gone online to get records of my ancestors, literally, in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was a cost. Again, I went to the archives website online and requested the record itself, and it was sent to me. It took about 3 or 4 weeks, but I got the record. So those tools, and remember, the archives, the state archives are a fantastic resource. And I do want to say also, as you do your research, use the census records, the federal census, because they give quite a bit of information about your relative. Some likes to give the birth month and year of your ancestor. Sometimes they even give a marriage month and year. So it depends upon what you're looking for. The key thing is really understanding the state in which you are seeking a relative's record. Again, finding out what that state, the earliest record dates for that state, and also knowing the locale of where your ancestor lived, and seeing if there are local records as well. And one of the most interesting places to look for local records is your library, your local library. Yes, I've gone to the clerk's place and done the same thing, a town clerk, and get information from the town clerk. Yes, you can request military records, and again, you have to go to the site to do that. And yes, we did get my father-in-law's records when he passed away. I had my dad's records anyhow, so I didn't need that. We also requested my uncle's records when he passed away, And I didn't do it, but my cousin got the records from, in this case, and information from the Army itself. But one of the key things you have to understand, some of these records have to be reconstructed because they've had so many fires associated with record systems. 1890, again, a whole census, the 1890 census is gone. Our earlier military records are available, but from post World War I up to and including World War II, sometimes the records are missing. Again, they've had fires, or water damage, and they have to recreate the records. And they can. They do have other tools available to them to recreate the records. And you can go online and do that as well. Now, if you want to get a hold of Fold 3, I recommend looking at Fold 3, depending upon the time period that you're looking for, that your relative lived in, and knowing the service. For example, Revolutionary War information is there. I found Civil War information there. I found my father's records in there. Oh, Sharon asked, we're required to prove relationship to the person. They've asked the question. Yes, they've asked the question, who are you? And of course, our grandchildren can do it. It'll just depend. But I say Fold 3 online is a great tool to find information. And that's a valid question. Again, when you access the information, you want to be sure, that people are properly, allowed to have that information. One of the most interesting things that I found was looking at records in Massachusetts, particularly Groton, Littleton, and smaller communities, and seeing that their town annual reports were fantastic. Again, because they provided you information about birth, death, and marriages. That annual report, again, the communities were not that big at that time. They really did a superb effort in keeping that information up to date. Matter of fact, sometimes they were too honest. Again, if there was an out-of-wedlock birth, they said that too. So it's hard to get away from certain things. To me, not only have I been researching in New England and Virginia and the like, I've not done deep South research. My relatives were primarily in Virginia, Maryland, DC area. That's where that group lived. And then the other group came from Canada over. There are some folks here in New England who were brought here as slaves or indentured servants early on. So again, the research has been here. Going to Canada was interesting, and I can do it online as well too, and so can you. Again, because information is available just like it is here. And Ancestry.com has a fantastic lead-in to Canadian research. Other countries, I've just done those countries myself. Other people have done other countries. I've not done Great Britain, Scotland, or Ireland particularly, because my people came over so early that the records are almost non-existent in those areas. And also trying to figure out, because we have no immigration information when they came over. They came over in the early 1700s, some of them. And again, there were no ship records either that can provide us some lead-ins. One of the key things, though, in some of the smaller communities, they will tell the you find the information in smaller communities of the ancestors, parents, and where they were born, and it helps, because when I say where, they may give the town, the county, as well as the country. So again, it helps in that sense. Any other questions? But please download those two forms. One is just a basic, simple sheet that gives the birth, marriage, and death states that started in that state. And the other one talks about information on how you can get information from the state itself. So that helps dramatically. And thank you, Sharon, for joining us. Any other questions? And Guzzy, Adrian, do you have any comments about your searches? Adrian Wells is our historian. And again, we do have a website and a Facebook page. So again, follow us, on those two. All of these sessions are recorded, and again, they're available on YouTube. I know you'd ask me that. So Adrian, jump on in here, if you would. Let's say Adrian Wells. He's the one who manages our web page. Facebook is look up, just type in African American Genealogy Society Fort Wayne, AAGSFW, and there's the website from Nguzzy. Oh, Crystal, thank you. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes with infant relatives in early death, sometimes the cemetery records are the only records you're going to have, because they were never recorded specifically in the community itself, only at the cemetery. Some towns, in fact, did record infant deaths in their annual record. So it just depends upon the community itself. When I found two infants, relatives of mine, who were actually born in the 1940s, and again, cemetery records were the best records for me, because I found nothing in the newspaper at all. Any other questions? Sharon, she asked the question, any luck with religious organizations sharing information, like AME Church and others? I've only done it with my own church, which is a congregational church, and got information from them. I've never really searched the others at all, to be honest. So I've not done that. I don't know whether, see, Adrian's not with us. Others may have done it. I just have not done that. Yeah, Crystal said cemeteries were so helpful because she says, I wanted to provide gravestones. Yeah, cemeteries are very, very helpful, let me tell you. I did the same thing when I was doing some research for some folks on Find a Grave. They asked me, to take a picture and everything else. I went to the local cemetery. They told me exactly where the grave was and the kind of information that they have. They in fact do have some interesting information. The other one would be funeral home records, if you could find them. Sometimes they can be very helpful, but sometimes those records, the funeral home no longer exists, and you might have to check the local library or the state archives for any of their records. So really had a good chance to vital. Okay, what about vital records of family cemeteries? when you, I guess if you're talking about family cemeteries, the first thing you have to do is find the cemetery. And here in Indiana, there's a good way to do that. The vital, if really it is a family cemetery, I've never invested in a family. I've only invested, investigated church cemeteries or city, state, or county cemeteries. So I can't speak directly to a specific family cemetery. We do have some in Allen County. And again, they're very, very small, very, very personalized in that sense too. I don't know whether the records are held if they were at the county level or state level. And Guzzi asked, did again, cemetery records have to be reported to the city or state? If a person passed away, they typically reported it to the town or city or state, depending on the time frame. And in many cases, they did provide. Many were buried in community community cemeteries. Now, for the family cemeteries, I've not seen that much information. They may exist. I just haven't seen it. One of the things I'm looking for is my fourth great grandfather. He died in 1837. Okay, let's see. Crystal says, oh, just a second. Let me get it from Crystal. She's helped an awful lot. She says, I have a family cemetery over 150 years old and do have township records. Very helpful along with church, as we're all members of the same church. That makes sense. Because remember, that the township quite often, again, they're typically small. They did keep good records. I ran across a situation twice. Once where my relatives in DC, the cemetery was moved to Maryland, and so again, you had to find out where it moved to, and my sister went down and did find out where our relatives are buried, and they had some interesting records there. I was involved with the United Methodist Church in actually approving the removal of a cemetery from around the Indianapolis airport to another location. And Crystal says, we still have to have township help with current burials. I can appreciate that, sure. Any other questions? Well, if not, I want to say thank you also very much for joining with us today. You saw information on our web page and our Facebook page. Please follow us. And again, we'll have a new workshop program in June. So again, please follow us. And I want to wish everybody, continuing to have a great weekend. The sun is out. So please enjoy. I want to say thank you all very, very much for joining with us. Take care.